Elizabeth I is credited to be one of England's best monarchs. She was the tail end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart reign. She went through many trials on her way to the throne, many including her parency and whether or not she would be considered legitimate enough to acquire the throne. Another being the fact that her mother was Anne Boleyn, which many of the Catholic Church did not credit to being King Henry VIII's actual wife. King Henry VIII did love all three of his children. However, he did play favorites, and there were some times where Elizabeth fell out of his favors because of her motherage. She was his second wife's daughter, who he claimed in his later life bewitched him into marrying him and poisoned his mind. Elizabeth was not only in danger because of her father's acts, but as well as her sisters. She truly felt that Elizabeth was the reason her father divorced her mother because of who her mother is. She took a very long, hard life. She's the oldest of her family's children, and she reigned the longest. She went through many trials as all of her courtiers wished that she would marry and secure a royal heir to her throne. However, she did one day throw a wedding and had herself as both the bride and the groom. And this was a symbol to show that she would not marry another person, but rather her kingdom. She had to go through many struggles to obtain her throne, both through the eyes of the church and through her sister. Her father left it very difficult for her to inherit the throne. It first went to her brother, and then her older sister Mary, and then to her. She used to believe that she would never acquire the throne, and was very content living out her life at Hatfield Manor. However, Mary saw the fact that she had followers as a threat and sent her to the Tower during her 5-year reign. She then had to endure the pain of going to the same place that her mother was held for the last few days of her life. Her mother was Anne Boleyn, and she was killed and beheaded by King Henry VIII, her father. She was wrongly accused of adultery, and her and 5 others were put to death. However, there is no proof that this was ever the case. In fact, King Henry VIII grew tired of her after giving birth to Elizabeth, when he and the royal astronomers believed that it would be a boy that Boleyn would bear. Mary held the fact that Anne Boleyn gave birth to a girl as a sign that her father may never have the child he dreamed of without her mother. And in fact, his third wife, Lady Jane Seymour, gave birth to a healthy boy by the name of Edward, who then grew to inherit the throne. Edward died at the young age of 16, only a few years after inheriting the throne. And the crown went to Lady Jane Grey, who after 8 days of ruling was put to death by beheading. Queen Mary was then put on the throne, and she lived there for 5 years. She married her cousin, the King of Spain, in hopes of having a child and securing the fact that Elizabeth would never reach the throne. However, she had 2 miscarriages and died, leaving the throne to her sister Mary. Mary then had to go through the pain of having to put her cousin to death, Mary, Queen of Scots. She did, however, build relations with other kingdoms, as everyone wanted to marry the young Queen of England. She always kept them waiting and never gave her answer. She did build England's army and marines, and the current Queen of England is named after her. During Henry's 6 wives, he had to change each of the royal crest 6 different times. It was a very difficult thing for Elizabeth, since she had to change all of her dinnerware in the castle after every marriage, since it would have the wrong print on it, being whether it was Anne of Cleves' badge versus Catherine Howard's badge. She, however, grew fond of some of her wives, and eventually moved in with Catherine Parr after her father's death. Catherine continued to look over her studies, and she grew very fond of her stepmother. She continued her studies and figured that if she was not to become queen, she might as well have all of the correct education to live her life. She vowed that she would never marry after seeing all of the marriages that her father had, and she kept the promise to her very end. Her good friend Robin Dudley, however, did marry, and she was gracious and joyous at his wedding. She had left the throne to her cousin's son, and thus began the Stuart dynasty. Throughout the years, Queen Elizabeth has taught many girls that it doesn't take a king for a queen to rule. She is a great inspiration and has had many institutions named after her. She had to face many tragedies in order to finally reach her triumph of securing the throne for her own. She was never truly seen as a princess, never treated like one either. She was considered a bastard, since in the eyes of the church, she was born out of an affair. She tried her best to create a relationship with her sister, even though her sister would have none of it. And she tried her best. She grew very fond of her little brother, however. And although she may never have known her mother, she kept her near and dear to her heart. She is said to be one of the reasons that the religion of England came to be, since her father desperately fell in love with her mother and thus created the Church of England. However, she did allow, for the first time in many years, to allow both Protestant and Catholic religions to thrive.